Charlemagne, born in 742, crowned king of the Franks in 768, earned the title Father of Europe. By the time he died in 814, his empire stretched over much of today's France, Germany, Italy, and beyond. He united more land than any ruler since Rome's fall. But his path was brutal. Over 40 years of near constant war built that empire. His most infamous campaign was against the Saxons, a pagan people in today's Germany. Charlemagne launched more than 18 wars to conquer them. After decades of resistance, in 782, he ordered the mass execution of 4,500 Saxons at Verdun for refusing baptism. Forced conversions, burned villages, deportations, these became tools of expansion in the name of Christianity. To his followers, he was spreading faith. To his opponents, he was a holy conqueror. For all this, Charlemagne still left deep marks on Europe. He standardized coinage, promoted learning during the Carolingian Renaissance, and was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in 800, a symbol that Europe's center of power had shifted west. His legacy is a paradox. Remembered as a visionary builder of Europe, law, and education, yet also as a king who used the sword and mass killing to achieve religious unity. Even today, he stands as both hero and tyrant, a reminder that empire and brutality often walked hand in hand.
Charles VI became king at just 11. At first, he was called Charles the Well-Loved, but by his 20s, episodes of violent insanity changed everything. In 1392, while traveling through the forest, he suddenly turned on his own men, killing several, convinced he was being attacked. From then on, episodes grew worse. Sometimes he believed he was made of glass, terrified he might shatter if touched. His illness left France leaderless during the 100 Years' War. Rival factions, his wife Isabeau of Bavaria and his brother Louis of Orleans versus his cousin, the Duke of Burgundy, fought each other for control. Civil war erupted inside France. In 1415, when the English crushed French forces at Agincourt, the chaos was clear. By 1420, the Treaty of Troyes disinherited his own son and recognized England's King Henry V as heir to the French throne. When Charles died in 1422, only fragments of France remained unoccupied. His madness didn't just ruin his reign, it nearly destroyed the kingdom. He stands as a tragic case of how one leader's illness changed the course of nations.
Louis XI, son of the flamboyant Charles VII, was nothing like his father. Frail in appearance, plain in manners, but sharp as a blade, he became known as the Spider King, weaving political webs across Europe. He broke the power of France's great nobles, especially through his victory over Charles the Bold of Burgundy in 1477, which brought vast lands under the crown. He loved diplomacy, using marriages, bribes, and secret networks of informants to outmaneuver rivals. He centralized authority, strengthened the economy, encouraged trade, and laid foundations for a stronger monarchy. But his methods made him feared. He was ruthless, locking enemies in iron cages called fillets, suppressing dissent harshly, and betraying allies when necessary. His reputation as manipulative and paranoid made contemporaries despise him. Yet his policies worked. By his death in 1483, France was stronger and more unified than it had been in centuries. Louis XI embodied the paradox of the effective but unloved ruler, the state builder whose webs shaped modern France, but whose shadowy tactics earned him a legacy of fear. Francis I stepped onto the throne in 1515. Tall, charismatic, and burning with ambition. He embodied the Renaissance spirit, pouring money into art, literature, and architecture. He brought Leonardo da Vinci to France, collected masterpieces, and turned Fontainebleau into a Renaissance palace. For this, he's remembered as the king who made France shine. But that shine came at enormous cost. Francis spent much of his reign locked in rivalry with Charles V, ruler of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, and England's Henry VIII.
endless wars, especially in Italy, drained France's treasury and shattered stability. In 1525, he suffered a devastating defeat at Pavia, captured and forced into humiliating terms before escaping back to his throne. At home, his reputation darkened with the rise of Protestantism. After the affair of the placards in 1534, which denounced Catholic Mass, Francis abandoned tolerance. He oversaw brutal crackdowns on reformers, burning heretics in Paris as warnings. When he died in 1547, France was culturally dazzling but financially strained and religiously divided. Francis I symbolized the glory and the cost of kingship, leaving both a flourishing Renaissance and the seeds of the religious wars to come.
Henry II, son of Francis I, inherited his father's love of war and intolerance of Protestant reformers. He continued costly campaigns against Charles V and imposed harsh measures against Calvinists, deepening France's religious divide. His personal life was just as dramatic. Married to Catherine de' Medici, he spent most of his affections on his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, who openly influenced politics and court life. While nobles whispered, Catherine quietly observed, biding her time for power. Henry's fate, however, came from spectacle, not politics. In 1559, celebrating a peace treaty with Spain, he joined a jousting tournament in Paris. A splintered lance pierced his eye, and after days of agony, the king died at just 40 years old. His sudden death left France in crisis. Catherine de' Medici stepped forward as Queen Mother, while her underage sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, fell under her shadow. The fractured state, combined with the Protestant-Catholic tensions Henry had sharpened, ignited decades of bloody French wars of religion. Henry II's reign is remembered less for his policies than for his death, a joust that turned celebration into chaos and left France politically fragile.
Catherine de' Medici. She wasn't born to rule France. She was an Italian noble who married Henry II. But after his jousting death in 1559, she outlived 3 of her sons who each took the throne: Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. As Queen Mother, she became the power behind them all. France at the time was ripping apart in the wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants. Catherine, pragmatic to the core, tried to balance both sides, arranging political marriages and shifting alliances endlessly. She's remembered most for the wedding meant to reconcile factions in 1572. Her daughter, Marguerite, married the Protestant Henry of Navarre. But days later came the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when thousands of Protestants were slaughtered across France. Was Catherine the mastermind, or merely swept along in the violence? Historians still argue. To her enemies, she was a scheming Italian poisoner, blamed for every intrigue of the era. Yet she fought to keep the monarchy alive when France seemed destined to collapse. When she died in 1589, Catherine left a kingdom bloodied but not broken. She remains one of history's most controversial figures, vilified as ruthless, but perhaps guilty only of doing whatever it took to keep her fragile dynasty alive.
Henry III, last of the Valois kings, came to the throne during France's long religious wars. Educated, refined, even fashion-obsessed, he seemed ill-suited to lead in an age of brutal conflict. He was trapped between extremes. Catholics thought he was too lenient. Protestants saw him as their persecutor. The Catholic League, led by the powerful Duke of Guise, used religion to undermine his crown, while Protestant Huguenots distrusted him completely. In 1588, Henry lashed out. He ordered the assassination of the Duke of Guise in his own palace at Blois. Instead of restoring authority, this sparked outrage. Catholics now viewed him as a tyrant. The following year, in the thick of war, Henry himself was assassinated by a radical Catholic monk. His death ended the Valois dynasty after nearly 3 centuries. Henry III is remembered less for victories than for indecision and alienation. Unable to satisfy either side, destroyed by the very factions he tried to control. His failure paved the way for the rise of the Bourbons, beginning with his successor, Henry of Navarre.
Henry IV, known later as Good King Henry, inherited chaos. A Protestant by birth,
He claimed the French crown in 1589 but faced Catholic opposition. To unite the realm, in 1593 he famously converted, declaring, "Paris is worth a mass." That pragmatic move helped him enter the capital and defeat rivals, but controversy followed. Protestants called him a traitor, Catholics doubted his sincerity. In 1598, he issued the Edict of Nantes, granting Protestants limited rights to worship and hold office. It was revolutionary, an attempted coexistence in a Europe tearing itself apart over religion. Yet both sides remained suspicious. Catholics thought he gave too much, Protestants thought too little. Still, Henry IV earned respect for stabilizing France. He promoted agriculture, repaired finances, and even cut taxes for peasants. After decades of bloodshed, ordinary people saw him as a king who cared about daily life. But not everyone forgave his compromises. In 1610, he was assassinated by a Catholic fanatic. His death shocked a nation finally finding peace. Henry IV's legacy is a paradox. Remembered warmly for healing France, but during his life condemned by extremists on both sides. To hold a broken kingdom together, he sacrificed his ideals, but saved the crown.
Louis XIII became king at just 9 years old after his father Henry IV was assassinated. For years, his mother, Marie de Medici, ruled as regent until Louis asserted himself and turned instead to a new confidant, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu became the architect of Louis's reign. Together, they broke the power of the feudal lords, crushed Huguenot strongholds like La Rochelle, and centralized authority in the crown. Richelieu insisted France must rise as Europe's dominant Catholic power, so France entered the 30 Years' War in 1635 against the Habsburg dynasty. By Louis's death in 1643, France was stronger internationally, but the price was high. Traditional nobility stripped of power, Protestants left vulnerable, and commoners burdened with taxes. Louis XIII himself was shy and plagued with ill health, often overshadowed by his minister. His legacy lies in paving the way for absolutism. Under his reign, the modern French state took root, but so did the resentments that would explode later.
Louis XIV reigned for a full 72 years, the longest in French history. Taking the throne at 5, he ruled directly from 1661, after Richelieu's successor, Mazarin, died. Declaring, "I am the state," Louis embodied absolutism. He transformed Versailles into an extravagant palace, forcing nobles to live under his watch, dazzling Europe with art, style, and theater. France became Europe's cultural powerhouse. But Louis waged near-constant wars. The War of Devolution, the Dutch War, the War of Spanish Succession, draining treasure and lives. By revoking the Edict of Nantes in 1685, he drove hundreds of thousands of Protestants into exile, weakening France's economy and deepening intolerance. His lavish spending, endless conflicts, and iron grip made him a symbol of both glory and burden. At his death in 1715, France was powerful, admired, yet financially exhausted. Louis XIV left a monarchy glittering on the outside, but fragile underneath, setting up the crises of the next century.
Louis XV. At just 5 years old, he had inherited his great-grandfather's throne. France adored him at first, Louis the Beloved, but decades of indecisive rule changed his image completely. Unlike Louis XIV's bombastic authority, Louis XV vacillated between advisors. His reign saw corruption, lavish court life, and scandals like his affair with Madame de Pompadour. Courts and church critics accused the king of moral decay. Meanwhile, costly wars like the War of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War sapped France. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, ended disastrously, with France losing nearly all of its North American colonies to Britain. Finances crumbled, prestige collapsed. At home, Louis XV struggled with reforms. He tried taxation changes but backed down when parliaments resisted. Instead of a strong monarch, he seemed weak, uninterested, and unable to stop decline. When he died in 1774, the people who once called him beloved had grown bitter. He left France poorer, humiliated abroad, suspicious of its monarchy, and ripe for crisis. His grandson Louis XVI would inherit not just the throne, but a powder keg.
Louis XVI came to the throne at just 19, inheriting the chaos his grandfather Louis XV left: immense debt, a restless nobility, and a people groaning under taxes. Personally, Louis was kind, pious, and interested in science and locks more than politics. But good intentions weren't enough. When financial collapse loomed, he summoned the Estates General in 1789, opening the door to revolution. What began as attempts at reform spiraled into the storming of the Bastille, mass uprisings, and the National Assembly seizing power. Louis hesitated constantly. He neither crushed the revolution nor fully embraced it. In 1791, he worsened his image by attempting to flee Paris in the flight to Varennes. Instead of a father king, he looked like a traitor. By 1792, radicals took control. The monarchy was abolished, and France declared war abroad. Louis was put on trial for conspiring against the revolution. On January 21, 1793, he was executed by guillotine in Paris. Louis XVI is remembered as tragically indecisive, a man who wanted reform but couldn't stand against history's tide. His failure marked the definitive end of absolute monarchy in France.
Marie Antoinette, Austrian princess and wife of Louis XVI, entered French imagination as a foreigner, a spendthrift, and eventually the most hated woman in France. At Versailles, her taste for luxury, jewels, gowns, and her private retreat, the Petit Trianon, gave her critics fuel. During France's financial crisis, she was ridiculed as Madame Deficit. Pamphlets portrayed her as immoral and domineering. The famous phrase, "let them eat cake," was never hers, but it captured public resentment. She had no real political role, yet her proximity to Louis made her a target. Rumors of secret influence, supposed affairs, and favoritism toward Austria fanned the flames. By the Revolution, her presence symbolized everything decadent about monarchy. When Louis was arrested, she was imprisoned too. After his execution, she endured a show trial by the Revolutionary Tribunal. Accused of treason and even fabricated crimes against her son, she was condemned. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed by guillotine before a massive crowd. To later generations, she became both villain and victim, either the wasteful queen who symbolized royal arrogance, or a misunderstood woman caught in a revolution far larger than herself.
Napoleon Bonaparte rose from a Corsican outsider to France's most famous ruler. A brilliant artillery commander during the Revolution, by 1799 he staged a coup, making himself first consul, then emperor in 1804. As a general, his genius was legendary. Victories at Austerlitz, 1805, Jena, 1806, and Wagram, 1809, reshaped Europe. He toppled dynasties, spread the Napoleonic Code, modernized administration, and inspired nationalism across the continent. But his ambition was endless. He expanded France into Italy, Spain, the Low Countries, Germany, even reaching Moscow. Each war demanded more soldiers, until millions died in campaigns stretching from Egypt to Russia. The 1812 invasion of Russia was catastrophic, with the frozen retreat costing 500,000 men. From then, defeat followed: Leipzig 1813, and finally Waterloo in 1815. Exiled first to Elba, then to the remote island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821, Napoleon left Europe scarred but transformed. To some, he was a tyrant and warmonger. To others, a modernizer who dragged Europe into a new era of laws, meritocracy, and nationalism. Even today, Napoleon's name commands awe, proof that one man's talent and ambition can both build and destroy an empire.
Napoleon III. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of Napoleon I, rose on his family name and popular promises. Elected president in 1848, he staged a coup when his term expired, declaring himself emperor in 1852. Early on, he looked like a modernizer. He rebuilt Paris with Baron Haussmann's grand boulevards, expanded railways, encouraged banking and industry, and even promoted workers' rights. Abroad, he played a bold game, backing Italian unification and expanding French influence overseas. But like his uncle, he overreached. His Mexican adventure, installing Maximilian as emperor, ended in disaster. At home, liberals criticized his press controls and authoritarian moves. The real collapse came with the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. Hoping for easy victory, Napoleon III underestimated Bismarck's Prussia. At Sedan, French forces were crushed, and Napoleon himself was captured. The Second Empire collapsed overnight, replaced by the Third Republic. Exiled to England, he died in 1873. His legacy is mixed. He reshaped Paris and modernized France's economy, but reckless wars and authoritarianism destroyed his empire. Where Napoleon I fell at Waterloo, Napoleon III fell at Sedan. Two rulers who proved that ambition runs deep in the Bonaparte bloodline and just as often ends in ruin.